the values of the liberal, the transhumanist, globalist, universalist system are crushing, or are trying to. Let's just put it that way. They haven't completely succeeded, but they're really trying hard to crush that aspect of what is sacred about humanity. And so really, I think I was starting to look at, like,
Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. It's John Nolan here, along with my wonderful co-host, Frank Jacob. Welcome to The Naked Truth. It's good to see you, brother.
Great to be back. How's life been treating you?
I checked the calendar and it's freaking, we're way into April here, and I'm just like, what in the world is going on? It was just New Year's. It was just Christmas. Right. It was just last summer. So everything is unfolding really fast. Some things are fantastic, namely a wonderful consciousness leaps in our beautiful community, that we have, just connecting with people, seeing how the expansion. That's just wonderful, right? That fuels us. And so we just keep showing up every day here at Inspire. That's what we do. But Frank, aside from this beautiful sort of a little bit of a screaming shirt that you're wearing today, you're having other sort of screaming news. What's been going on in the Frank Jacob universe?
Well, I thought it was important to wear a screaming shirt today, especially with certain symbols on it for the reasons you'll find out later. Yeah, I mean, I've been deep diving again, and I just came across some mind-blowing information, about Earth, about ancient Earth, about the moon, things that are I'm just going down, like, I started going down this rabbit hole, with Time Capsule, and it's going even further. So I had to do something about it. So I've been actually designing and working on a brand new webinar, which will be webinar number 4.
That's always exciting news. Well,
let me put it up. I did a cool graphic. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see what it looks like, just to give you a taste.
X-Files.
What do you think of that name?
I want to know more about it. You have a way with picking those names, and just, it's really good. So what are the ancient X-Files?
Right. Well, it's like, I was looking at this information. There's no other way to describe it other than X-Files, but they're ancient. They're going back into ancient times, and we know what the X-Files are kind of about in general. Totally. That it's stuff that has to do with the paranormal, the supernatural, the phenomenon of little things that we see up there flying around, right? So it all made sense. Like, it was okay. Well, this isn't something that happened like in the last 100 years or whatever, 200 years, or every now and then you have these anomalous things. But this goes back a long way, right? Even to the point where Atlantis, Lemuria might not even be the oldest civilizations. This is how far it goes back, and the evidence is there. And it's funny because it kind of builds on, we did a DVD, those things that they still stick into the, those plastic things, right? Do you remember that word, DVD? Digital video disc,
I remember VHS too. It's not like.
We did a DVD with an Austrian researcher called Klaus Donner. And he's famous for out-of-place artifacts, for people who don't know that term, UParts, whatever. It's like things that shouldn't exist because they mean that if what we were told about history is true, then this shouldn't exist, right? So there are elements of what we put on that DVD which were not really, they were never fully explained. They were mysterious things. They were like, mysteries. Now I've just come full circle to find little chunks that actually put those things into perspective that I never expected. So, I'm putting it out there.
Cryptic, Frank.
What?
Way to keep it cryptic here. I'm intrigued.
Well, we're talking about, there's things like, I don't want to give too much away, but there's things like language, right? I mean, one of the things that Klaus discovered when he was doing his research, which you put onto that DVD, had to do with there seemed to be the same language all around the world. And it, it's how could that be, right? I mean, that doesn't make sense, right? Because when did language happen, right? And how come? And there's no how. Why would it be that on Africa or in South America, whatever they'd be speaking the same, but they'd have the same symbols, the same writing, and things like that, right? So there's reasons for that, and the other element is that's coming into it. That's really interesting. It has to do with the universe is built up on our standard model of the world. We've talked about some of this stuff in our show, is based on this theory of relativity and the Big Bang and all that, right? The particle physics and gravity, right? Well, I mean, I touched on this in Time Capsule, but this is the new world science is having to do with plasma, and we're moving into the plasma age. And so they're like, people don't know much about this. They just know a little bit about it. What does it all mean? What is the significance of a plasma age? And so, I mean, now it's becoming clear. I'm talking to some of the leading experts. I've managed to, just coerce them, gently nudge them to join me so I can pump their brains. And I'm going to be adding that in so that we can get a better understanding of what that means and what kind of a, like, not just how does it work and, what is it all about, but what does it, like, how does it play out in our world? Because, who cares if it's like a Big Bang or, a standard model versus electric universe? What does it really matter, right? Well, it does actually matter because it has to do with consciousness. And as you know, I'm a consciousness archaeologist. So, I had to incorporate this new information. So I'm putting it out there. In fact, it went live today, so people that are watching can go and I'm offering again, as always, to the, to the inspired tribe.
Hold on. You're saying it's already there?
Well, no, I'm saying that what I'm doing is I'm offering a chance for people to get in on it now at a, like 40% discount, so that essentially they're going to get, they're going to be assured that they're going to have something mind-blowing on the table in the summer. And the other thing is they're going to participate in exchange, just like a quid pro quo. This is the new community model, right? So
consciousness economy,
right? So I'm already deep into it. I've got time. I mean, you wouldn't want to see my mind map. It's just, out of control. But the next part now is, of course, as always, piecing it all together so that the whole thing even makes sense. So that's my next step, and that's what I'm going to do. And so I'm offering it to people now if they want to get in on a deal now. They want to have a discount on it. They want to, participate in the actual, in a way, production process. So this is kind of what it's about. So I'm doing that, and you can put a link down below.
We'll put the link below, but I love this for various reasons. Here's the thing. If you want the ancient X-Files sooner rather than later, it literally is up to all of you. You get it at a much discounted price now. You also help Frank keep his focus on this rather than doing other work in the meantime. So this is what the consciousness economy is about. Everybody wins, everybody should win here. So I'd encourage you, if you've seen any of Frank Jacob's webinars, this is kind of always a special thing. People look forward to it. It's almost like, okay, I'm going to carve out some 8 hours over the weekend here, and I'm going to sit down and watch a new Frank Jacob webinar. So hop on over, links in the description. Get it today, watch it a little later, and Frank's going to deliver another fantastic one. I can say this with a great amount of confidence.
Well, I would say, John, this is probably going to be the most fantastic one ever. This is like... I know the last one was great, but this one, man, this kind of stuff even blew my mind.
You wouldn't be putting it out if you didn't think it was better than everything else. I mean, it's kind of like when you write a song. I don't put anything out that I think is just mediocre. It's got to be what I feel is the best song I've ever done, Exactly.
And I didn't even know if I was going to do another webinar. After the last one, I'm like, what else can I do? I mean, this covered so much, and it's still current, and it's still active, and it's, it's there, but this one, this is just like another level altogether, another dimension, literally.
I look forward to it, Frank. You also said to me, when we were kind of talking about this new episode of The Naked Truth, you said, we have a lot of ground to cover. This is important stuff. What's on your mind? What's on your heart, brother?
Well, the thing is, I'm looking at this global situation, and when I take time away from producing the webinar, that is, and I'm looking at what's going on, right? And it's clear to me that we're in a war. It's a war. There's no other way to describe it. I remember when I was living in Montreal back in the 90s, I was like, this is like, when you first wake up and to all this information, you kind of realize there's a war on consciousness in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But this has really gotten like, that's been like 30 years. I mean, and it's gotten so intense that this is really, I think, what people have to realize, that this isn't just return to normal anymore. This is things are happening so fast. The density of change is happening at such an incredible pace that people need to understand a few things. They need to understand what's at stake here, and they need to understand some things, I think, about conservation. This is a funny word, right? But what did you vote in the States last time around, right? You voted conservative, right? Conservative. What does that mean? People don't even think about it. It's such a stupid, dumb word, right? It's Republican and conservative. But what does conservative really mean, right?
Nothing
And
is being conserved here. Trust me.
well, I mean, you tell me that, right? So this is why I think we need to discuss that. Why is nothing? But the thing is, something has to be conserved. What has to be conserved? The things that have to be conserved are the things that we deem to be sacred, the things that we deem to be valuable. The special things about humanity need to be conserved. Because why? Well, because there's this intense transhumanist technocratic agenda, which is just moving faster and faster and faster. And it's exactly the opposite. The values of the liberal, the transhumanist, globalist, universalist system are crushing, or are trying to. Let's just put it that way. They haven't completely succeeded, but they're really trying hard to crush that aspect of what is sacred about humanity. And so really, I think I was starting to look at, like, and I've been doing this show with Greg and
the quartet with
Peterson, the quartet, right? And so they always throw out these questions, like these big questions, right? Like, where's things going? Telepathy, I think, was one of the last ones that we had, and one of the things that I really kind of struck me looking at when I was putting together research for that, I had something in there about the New Age, and I'm like, yeah, it's funny. I made this like realization, and I talked about it on that show about how a lot of these ideas about where things are going now really have their basis in the New Age. And I mean, it seems like, yeah, kind of a no-brainer. And a lot of people are in the New Age. What does it mean? It's a very generic kind of general term, but in a lot of ways, whatever has sort of created the New Age had its start a long time ago. And when you look at that spectrum of where it started and some of the milestones along the way, you have to say that what's considered the New Age is pretty much this, globalist concept, this globalist direction that they're trying to get people to accept. And so what you realize is that something like this is the soft version of a war, right? I was saying this is a war. This is what I mean. It isn't a war with guns. This is not a war with tanks.
This is worse.
Not a
this
war.
Is worse.
This is a war on the mind of people. And yes, exactly, right? So I wanted us to talk about this, and I want to go through some of the, if we have time today, some of the, like laying the foundation. Where did it come from? Who were the key players, just so people see it. And I want people to take it into consideration. Like, we're not preaching, and believe me, you always have to leave room for argument. And if someone can argue your point, to show you're wrong, because there has to be flexibility here. But I want us to consider some of these things, because if you look at them in a different, maybe you need to look at them in a different perspective. Maybe you didn't think about it this way before. Just to kind of take a step back and go, am I participating in this consciously or unconsciously? Right?
Well, I kind of look at, and you're so right. It's such a broad movement. It doesn't have clear boundaries. It isn't like a clear doctrine that begins here and ends there. It was, to me, it almost felt like a sort of a tank that could capture the rebellion from all streams of mainstream society and let them roam freely for a while, right? There was a very free sort of field where you could be whatever you wanted to be and express yourself. And through the 60s and 70s and 80s, and then it started to become very more concise, commercialized. You had the publishers, the movies. It became its own entity, also very lucrative. And so it turned from sort of a rebellion to a mainstream
Yeah.
sort of way of being. And then it's literally now become the mainstream of looking at the world, and it's using those leaders to perpetuate these stories. But I'll tell you, the wake-up call for many from the new age hypnosis, and I'll just say that's what I think it is in many ways, because there's a lot of great truths in there too, don't get me wrong, was
Right.
when the majority of people that subscribe to any of the streams within the new age showed up uniformed in 2020, said yes to all the measures, screamed at everyone who didn't, threw all their alternative teachings overboard, and rolled up their sleeve a year later. That's what really shocked those who had open eyes and said, hold on, what does this has to do with freedom and free expression and open spirituality? None of it, right? So I think that was sort of a turning point, but it's made a good comeback in recent years. It's sort of luring people in again. And
Sure.
now people are, sort of, for me, that's just my perspective, this mishmash of MAGA woke Q all thrown together. Let's go into 5D ascension, and it's happening any day now. So it's, hopium pattern. It's all thrown in there. It's a massive psyop,
Right.
to be honest. And so that's sort of a little bit of an overview of what I have seen in recent years.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, it's like where what's amazing in that point you just raised at the end is I think a crux point here. This indoctrination that has seeped into the consciousness world, led to the fact that it's operating on multiple vectors, right? One of those vectors is the educational system, right? It's been corrupted. So nobody even really knows what their immune system's capable of anymore. Nobody really understands the way their body's biology even works, and then on top of it, there's this sort of fake morality that's laid over top, mostly, based on the Abrahamic religious Judeo-Christian model of turn the other cheek, right? And if you look at, what happened, right? And, like you said, these leaders of the new age, consciousness field had an obligation, if what they were talking about was true to the spirit of what they were meaning about consciousness and sovereignty, and that a lot of a lot of it is based on this idea that we're God. We have this, either we're God, right, or we have this spark of God in us, and and we radiate that out to all the other sparks out there, right? And if this is really true, and if they really believe that, and that we're all energy, right, and that we're invincible, and we attract those things to us because of our state of consciousness, and we repel those things because we're not at that state of consciousness, and etc., etc. And yet here they were, basically saying we need to take the Beatles. I went to a website of, I'm not even going to mention his name because you would be shocked. He's one of the biggest channelers, right? I went to his website.
I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
And I found a direct, I didn't just see like, stay away from the Beetlejuice. No, it was not any, was it not that? It was like, here's a direct link to the CDC to get your information. And I'm like, all right, that kind of says it all right there, right? What more can you say at that point? And this is a person who receives thousands of dollars for an appearance to spew forth the wisdom from the extraterrestrial, whatever, it's like, it's shocking. It's really shocking, and people like and because of this indoctrination to the turn the other cheek thing, everyone's just kind of like they've moved on, you know. I mean, and because and because of this philosophy, basically it's saying we are allowing the perpetrators to harm us, you know, to just totally obliterate the freedom of our expression, and yet we're just supposed to turn and let them continue doing it, right? So
because what you resist persists, Frank. So you don't, you know what I mean? And that is absolute. So, you know, somebody wants to rape you, put you on the ground, and you just don't persist, you don't resist. And, you know, I have this, I've been walking around with this thought for the last few days. You know, we're working on a world that's gentler and calmer and more beautiful and saner, probably. But, you know, at the same time, until then, I'll keep one in the chamber, if you know what I mean. And I'm like, you know, you come at me, I'll do what I have to do. I won't be shy to use that. But you're right. There's a complacency. There's this inexplicable retrieving further and further back, allowing more and more invasion of your space. Where do you think that? What's the programming, especially with the New Age community? Why is there such
well, let's look at that. Okay, here, look at this. I'm going to put this up. This is everybody who's in the New Age needs to know this person,
Blavatsky?
right? Because you know, actually, you know, you could go back further. There's like something called Hermetica, right? Which is where these two principles, like you are God and Mother Earth is dying, need to save her, blah blah blah, which are kind of the foundations of this New Age thing. But with Helena Blavatsky, it was kind of she was like her book, The Secret Doctrine. If you're interested in getting on the turf of the New Age in the very beginning, these books are kind of like the must reads, right? Isis Unveiled, The Secret Doctrine. She was the founder of the Theosophical Society, and I think one of the main points with her was that she brought out something called these Mahatmas. They're like the white hats, the white brotherhood. There's this brotherhood of elite people that are chilling somewhere in the Himalayas, you know, and they're basically, their whole thing is about guiding humanity, that there is this guiding force of humanity which has all this wisdom, and we know that there's a direction that humanity's moving, and then Blavatsky had it she called it the root races, and she described several different waves of these root races, culminating essentially in the sixth root race, which would be the one where we all kind of like blend together as one people, like the generic human. Like, because right now, look, face it, is there a generic human being, John, right now? Like, if
not
you
yet, not yet. No.
I mean, like, like, if you were to describe a human being, like, well, there's Afro-Americans, there's you know, people, and the Asian people, the Middle Eastern people, the, you know, like, but is there really, and within those there's subdivisions of different kind, but there isn't really a generic template. And so her idea of this is what I'm talking about with this universality, this fake idea that universality is somehow superior to individuality and diversity of concept of race, of nationhood, nationality, that you actually, as a person growing up in a specific geographic location, might actually develop a unique identity based on the environment that you've grown up in. The weather, the climate, the plants, the animals, the cultural expression is going to be different. And that's what makes life exciting, because you can, you know, if you can afford it or get on a plane, nowadays almost anybody can, but, you know, back in the day, I mean, it was rare, right? But if you could, and you went to another nation and you landed there, I mean, I remember the first time I went to Los Angeles, it was like, wow, palm trees, right? It affects you, right? This is this diverse idea, and this idea of universality is going to crush that. And there's another person who was key in this idea of universality, and his name was Richard Kalergi, Richard von Coudenhove Kalergi or something, right? And his idea was that there was all going to be this bronze-skinned race of people who are going to all mix together and become this uniform porridge of humanity. So that was kind of like, that was the modern, like, Western world start of it all. leaving aside the Hermetica, which came out of Egypt, which was based on Thoth and this idea, right? And after Blavatsky, the second generation of theosophists came along, and there you had another woman, and her name was Alice Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you ever got into Alice Bailey's material, but people that didn't get into it, those blue books that you see on the screen there, I mean, literally, this woman wrote about, like, I don't know, like a yard and a half of those blue books, and she took this idea of hierarchy even another step, and she wrote a book that was actually called The Externalization of the Hierarchy, right? And these, you know, you can see there on the screen. But basically, her idea was, you know, the idea of this cabal of enlightened teachers. She actually brought that whole concept into none other than the United Nations. And what people don't realize, I didn't really notice about, I didn't really follow that. I read The Secret Doctrine, and I actually have some of Bailey's books. Because, you know, can you believe it? I actually lived at the address of the Theosophical Society. So I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. In the 90s, I lived in Boston at the Theosophical Society where they had the classes. So I was really close to this information, including like stuff like A Course on Miracles. And we can get into some of that later. But what's interesting
Many of our
is
viewers
that
are too, Frank. I mean, this is a...
probably they are.
If you've gone through the New Age books and the education, that's like a standard, right? The Course of Miracles, these books and these teachings are standards. And for me, the dangerous part is there's a great essence of truth in there, and then there is such deception, in my perception, anyways. It's like blinding deception.
Right.
That's at least, yeah. So yeah,
right.
Please carry on.
And the funny thing is with Bailey is that you know, they set up a publishing company, and guess what they called it? They called it the Lucifer Publishing Company.
The Lightbringer.
Right. And so they obviously, for PR reasons, they had to change the name, and they changed it to the Lucas Trust or the Lucis Trust. And, you know, they began to put out these books all about this hierarchy of ascended masters and themes like the return of the universal Christ, the coming of the new age of enlightenment, you know, the influence of cosmic beings, ETs or whatever, spiritual guides, angels from other dimensions. And the funny thing is that, you know, most people didn't really make the UN connection. I never made the UN connection when I was into that material. But what you realize now is that essentially the Lucas Trust has maintained, and even to this day, consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. People don't really realize that, right? So they operate under this idea of promoting spiritual principles, global cooperation, sound a little bit familiar, you know, and advocating for spiritual enlightenment, which is aligned with global governance, right? So these are words that they were using at, you know, literally 100 years ago, right? So, you know, their idea of this world unity and all this stuff is it fits perfectly and overlaps absolutely perfectly, which is kind of spooky with this whole, you know, World Economic Forum stuff, right? So you know, and it's just you know, stuff about sustainability, global governance, restructuring of consumption. And so there's this, and I think the key word here that was part of the Bailey's material, which we should just, you know, we can throw out there, is that she had this belief in a plan for humanity's spiritual evolution. The plan.
That's the key. That's the key point that I wanted to get at and ask a fair question, Frank. If you are on this earth long enough and you observe things long enough and you look at the pitfalls and the violence and the disputes and the divisions, false divisions, almost none of us would argue with a world that is more unified, that accepts certain truths together and says, this is the truth, we live by it and we live with it, and we can share this place in harmony and in peace. And it almost sounds like, you know, sort of this new world order that they talk about, but it is a natural development. Our consciousness rises, we learn more, we expand more, we come to this conclusion through a natural sort of evolution. I don't see anything wrong with that. I've never thought, and probably through that we would probably tear down border walls and sort of have no need for it because there's no greed and no nothing. But we're not even close to that. What this plan is, and what bothers me, whether it's on the political level or on the socioeconomical level or spiritual level, is that someone decided this is the course and we're going to push humanity. We're going to push them through wars, through violence, through disease, through psyops and MK Ultra and all the crap. We're going to push them there. And how can something that is supposedly good and true and honest in its nature, like these teachings present themselves to be, lead to such a plan? How's your take on this? Basically, a similar outcome, but completely different path.
Well, it's because it goes back actually a lot further. It goes back to this foundational idea of kind of like some world teacher or some, grand finale where there's like a judgment day. And, this started a couple of thousand years ago, actually 4,000 years ago, to be honest. But it's just morphed and morphed and more. It's had centuries to evolve, and it all borrows on a lot of the same terminology. That's why when you read a book like The Secret Doctrine or Bailey's, it seems very complex, and you're going like, wow, like, I mean, this is really intellectually sound, like this is really impressive, right? But it's just borrowing on the Kabbalah and the Torah and biblical text, and it's just rehashing and recycling that same ideology again and again, so that there's like the idea of a planetary initiation, the group consciousness, all this stuff that's artificial. Like, when you think about it, like what you just said, that, we're going to evolve, there's going to be natural evolution. Well, think back on, and this is one of the things that blows me away about the ancient past, is that I can show you that we've actually had far more unified or cohesive stages of human existence than we have right now. I would say right now that our state of human existence is about as chaotic, fractured, and dysfunctional and psychotic as it's ever been.
I agree fully. We have reverted. We have been in
right.
Yeah.
So you would think then, with this information, like that, this gift of knowledge from Blavatsky and Bailey and others, right, that we would be the highest level we've ever been at. And on top of it, we have the cool technology to go along with it, right? We can communicate instantly, globally. It's just this whole this is a schizophrenic reality that we've landed in, and people need to think about this, because like this stuff that's being pushed at us isn't, you shouldn't have to be forced to love somebody. Like the commandments say, thou shalt, whatever, right, love thy neighbor like you love thyself. Well, why should you have to be told, if it's a natural evolution in your consciousness, to love your fellow human beings, right? This isn't something that should be a commandment. This is something that should arise out of your own level of intuition, empathy, and ethics, and understanding, and intellectual, or you could say emotional intellectuality, like just, to be emotionally mature. These are things that would come all on their own. You don't need rules for that. And the fact that these books and these materials just keep coming again and again in new rehashed forms and new language for a new generation is, for me, the proof that they are not leading us there. They are not at all. I mean, and they're just continually evolving. I mean, the last one, some of the later ones that came after Bailey and Blavatsky were like, we talked about this one before on the right. Her name is Hubbard, right? She's the friendly grandma everyone loves, right? Well, she's part of the United Nations, right? She's part of she's set up something called the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, right? And, humanity's on the threshold of a quantum leap of newly emergent scientific, social, and spiritual capacities. Really? Well, where did she borrow that from? From another guy on the left side of the screen. His name is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was a French Jesuit, right? So his idea was the noosphere. That means essentially, like, completely dissolve us into the spiral that's going to come to a point where everything is one. We're all one. Everyone, it's all love. We're all one. These things are not true, and we didn't come here to this planet. This isn't an anthropos experiment to make us all like one porridge. what's interesting about us and what's unique about us is that we are diverse and we work in groups and we have, you know, differing opinions, we have different ideas, and that works. That's what makes the human species so formidable in comparison to, for example, AI. AI, you know, is reaching for the same database, and if you put a bunch of computers onto the same line, they're going to draw on the same information and likely come to the same conclusions. You put 10 people together in a room and give them a problem, and they're going to come up with 10 different approaches, 10 different angles, and 10 different levels of genius to solve the problem that a machine would never be able to do. And so these are like some of the ingrained ideas of this. Yeah, I guess they're calling it Christ consciousness or Christogenesis, I think is what Chardin called it, right?
Synthetic Christ consciousness.
These are all based on this idea. And listen, I know there's a lot of people listening that are into Jesus Christ or Christianity or the Christ, whatever, right? And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that that story, it has a beginning, and it was also written by people that had an agenda. That whole concept of the Christ, you know, you can still take the idea of Fosters, which is, for example, what the Gnostics called them, people that were enlightened that show up every now and then in society and give us impulses and impetuses to reach higher levels of thinking, new ideologies, new things that are part of the natural evolution of humanity. But this idea of this one person that is the only person and is the image of what humanity should be, all of humanity, you know, this is a very, very dangerous idea. And this, you know, and on top of it, the image that they give us for this person, I have a picture of it right here, is this, you know,
on a torture instrument, you know,
the
that's
divine victimhood, right? And you know, it's like there's this idea of suffering and becoming totally, you know, locked into this, you know, game of believing that the higher spiritual way is to suffer and to go through this, and this is what this one guy did and came here to teach us. And you know, these ideas are dangerous.
I think the greatest takeaway is that you can look at this sphere of influence from a spiritual perspective. You can look at it from a cosmic perspective, from a societal, political, economic, and you will come always to the same engineering that is happening where something is being externally changed, and it's an external force that tries to change something that's an internal process for us humans. And there's someone who has developed a plan and wants to impose that on the human family, it is an imposition, as the word says. And that is my fundamental problem with anyone. If the concept isn't freedom and a free will to educate yourself and elevate yourself and use the information that you get to raise your consciousness and your empathy and your thinking and your problem solving, if that isn't coming from within, it is not only worthless, but it is not freedom, it's slavery, and you can twist it any way you want. That's what this is. I don't care how well-intentioned someone is. They don't have the freaking right to do it. And, you know, and to decide what's better for someone else. And this is what bothers me so much, and what has, you know, and part of this big new age movement was the law of attraction community, which is a massive hypnotic, almost MK Ultra style, where people are so compartmentalized in their thinking. They're so afraid to think a negative thought. They're so afraid to look at anything negative. They're so afraid to actually solve a freaking problem that they completely, like, you know, they just fall off the edge, and there's no saving. And there's this mind control. And what we're basically, Frank, what we've been trying to do for the last years that we've been doing this together is to bring things back to here and say, hey, whatever's going on, you know, start with baby steps, solve one thing at a time, because it isn't that consciousness evolution isn't the real thing. It isn't that the more that we raise our consciousness, the better everything gets. But it has to happen from within. It can't be induced from outside of us. And the idea that this is possible is a lie in and of itself. What you can do is create the image by changing us, whether it's through mind control or through technological manipulation, is to make certain things in us dormant, maybe our more animalistic instincts, make those dormant. Drug induced can also happen. It's happening with 60% of the population through antidepressants and whatnot. Yes, but that is manipulation. That's like you would treat animals, and you wouldn't even treat animals this way. So, but in your perception, because you're looking at this from your own perspective, what are sort of the pitfalls? What are things where people should be careful and say, if you encounter this is dangerous territory. This is not for your benefit.
Well, I think you hit on a couple of them right there. You were just talking about how when it's forced on you externally, right? And if you look at, the Quran, for example, the first thing out of their gate is like, you have to believe this. You must believe it. If you doubt it, you're sinning right off the bat. It's forcing you to accept and adopt the ideology without question. There is no question here. This is the absolute 100% truth, and you cannot deviate from it in a one way or another, right? You're just locked in. And and it is a deviation, a derivative of one of the Abrahamic religions. I mean, they all came out of the same Judeo-Christian concept. And the Christians, they're not as extreme. They can question it, they can get into it, but most of them are so ignorant of their own material and of what it really means that they don't even know how to frame the proper questions, to put it in question, to ask you the right questions, and to go into the historical aspect of it, or to take an interest in it to the point where, just like, people don't really understand how their bodies work anymore. They don't teach it in school. They just abdicate their complete sovereignty, and they give up their free will to accept the priests of the pharmaceutical industry's remedies. They've also abdicated that idea of sovereignty of mind, of questioning things with the other priests of the church, which are coming to them and saying, this is, what you must believe in, or these are the laws, right? And this is what Jesus said. Well, how many people have actually gone in and looked at what Jesus actually taught, right? And have actually looked at that question of like, well, what did he say? What did he write? Well, guess what? He didn't write anything. You know that? He didn't write a thing. Other people wrote what he said, and they didn't even write it like right on the spot. They wrote it like 100 years later even. And so, what did they write? Can we trust what they wrote, right? And what are they saying? And, what is the whole point of looking at it from the perspective of somebody who is untouchable, when actually we could look at it more archaeologically, more reasonably, more logically, put in the faculty of intelligence that we were given. That is the one thing that was divine that we were given. We were given intelligence, because you can actually prove that you are intelligent, but you can't really prove that you're a god. You can't prove that you're a spark of God. How can you prove that? You can't. You can say it, and you can try to adopt these ideologies and go out there in the world and beam at everyone like you're Christ consciousness, and you're looking at all the other people out there.
You don't think you're a divine spark? You don't think you have that spark in you?
I look at it more like we have the intelligence, which is a divine endowment. And okay. It's not a spark of God, and the idea of us being God is kind of pointless. It's ridiculous. It's useless. This is information you don't need. For me, it's better to look at yourself as an intelligence that has been given this divine endowment to combine with some of your other endowments and work together with humanity to progress toward blossoming into the genius potential that we haven't yet reached, because there's another story to this. The story that I've been exploring, of course, is the story of the archons and that influence of this parasitic, what people call the matrix, whatever you want to call it, simulation, the idea of being pulled away from your natural state of being and drawn into these artificial worlds. And what world is more exemplary of an artificial matrix simulation than the IT world, right? Where you're sitting in front of the screen all the time, disconnected from nature, disconnected from other people, and you're isolated little islands. And so you're not really exercising your true divinity in terms of your intelligence on an emotional level with interaction with other human beings. The connection between you and a person in live in a room is completely another quality altogether. And there's no doubt about that. That's just a fact, right? So yeah, that's what I think that people should be looking at in terms of how to embrace spirituality and look at the questioning and framing the proper questions of the belief systems that they have, to take into consideration things like, where did this idea come from in the beginning? And if they look at that idea, it might be shocking what they find.
I think we're actually talking about the same thing, Frank, and we're just calling it something else. I might gravitate more towards the word consciousness, which is, gives us the ability to transcend the limitations of what this body can sense, and go for bigger spheres or greater spheres, go outside and perceive more than what the senses of the body can, which is obviously a form of intelligence that can't be solely, doesn't come from the body. It experiences the body more than anything else. I would call that the divine spark, if you will, but I think the name matters less. Also, I think that when you sit somewhere all day and talk about spirituality and have the white robe and do the guru thing, that's sort of, it's very off-putting to me. It has very little practical value for people. It's like, what are we actually doing with the knowledge that we gain? And this is the fundamental question is, what are we doing with these discussions and what we gain from them, and how we maybe spiral up? And, I get something from you, you might hear something from me or others, and we go, oh, here's a greater level of understanding of this now. But what do we do with it? It's 2025. We've been at this for decades, and now together for a few years. What are we all doing with this? And this is the question where in 1990 or 95, you might have had the feeling, oh, we have some time, but we don't, right? This window's closing because we have this, this ideology wants to go all the way. It wants to close the door on what our biology is, on what the supposed flaws are, on what it means to be human, and streamline the whole process, just like they streamline AI, right? I mean, that's the idea. So we're here, and this is not a discussion that's self-serving. It isn't so we can have a good time talking about it. It's because we need fundamental change in our thinking, in our acting, and in perceiving who we are. And you said something earlier. You said, it's this turn the cheek, the meek shall inherit the earth kind of deal that has always bothered the shit out of me, because who gets invaded in their own home and says, sure, there's more money in the other room? You don't do that. You grab something and you hit the guy over the head, or you shoot, whatever you need to do. Right. Where's that, what's your take on this? Because we're both peaceful men, but we're not harmless men. There's a difference. We seek peace where we can.
Right. The thing is, it's a natural instinct for you to resist evil, John. It's a natural instinct for anybody who's a mother and has a child and sees something approach that child to do harm, to resist that form of violence. And by putting out a teaching that basically is, as another commandment, right? Resist not evil, like, turn the other cheek. If everyone in the world were to follow that command, turn the other cheek, there'd be no need to turn the other cheek, right? Because no one would be acting harmfully toward anyone else. Good point. So it cancels itself out. It's like, but people take it on faith, and they think that, really, like, the people that actually would be inclined to harm others, they're relying on those people to embrace the same practice of non-defense, right? Ask yourself, if the people that are inclined to harm and abuse others, and will they change their behavior voluntarily just because they're confronted with a peace person who just doesn't resist them? Like, when in the human experience has this happened? Are there any examples in history where violent people suddenly confronting soft, peaceful people went, whoa, wait a minute. Oh, we can't do this.
The official narrative is Gandhi did that. That's the official narrative.
Right. We always have a Gandhi somewhere. The exception proves the rule, right? But the thing is, the perpetrators, I mean, it's a perfect, actually, it's a perfect con. It's a perfect psyop, really. And it really makes you wonder if
It's the
this was,
abuser. It's the abuser psyop, right? That's what
it's
the
an
abuser
abuser
wants you to do. Is turn the
psyop,
fucking other
right?
cheek. Yeah.
Exactly. And the perpetrators, you know, they are actually obliged to be defensive, but in a different way altogether. They have to hide and they lie and they do whatever it takes to protect themselves so that they can continue to perpetrate and penetrate our minds without being detected or defeated. Like narcissists, you know, I mean, have you ever known a narcissist? They gaslight you, they pretend that they're a victim, you know, and really, like, if you look at what happened with respect to the Beetlejuice, right? The people who gave us COVID, they're still walking free in the world, even though, you know, you could argue, committed some of the most heinous crimes against humanity of all time.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. There is no doubt about that, John. And the fact is that they're still walking out there free my take is it's a direct result of these kinds of teachings of resist no evil and turn the other cheek, right? So that's one of them, right? You know, and I think these ideas are counter-human. They're counter-intuitive to not, and you know, we're not condoning going out there to be violent for the sake of being violent, but sometimes violence is necessary. You know, if you have cancer and you think you know, and there, I mean, you know, you might be one in a billion that sits there and ohms it away, but by far, and you know, the majority of people that want to beat it, they actually have to use the most brutal methods possible to get that thing out of their system. That means going to the knife, that means going to chemicals or whatever they do, right? Some people do alternative, but it's radical. It's a radical therapy to eliminate a toxin out of your body. You can't just expect it's going to go away because you're sweet and because you're an evolved person. Some of the most evolved and amazing people on this planet have died, okay, because of that. And so this is just an example of how it's natural for us to actually resist something which is evil, something which is, you know, harmful to us. And so we just have to, the level of intelligence in us, the emotional intelligence, will help us decide what measure of violence is necessary. Is it just a slap on the face, or is it like, you know, the full-on, you know, war against, you know, some other nation or whatever, trying to penetrate your borders and do harm to something that you've built up and something that you hold sacred?
You know, to me, I've always looked at it this way. Violence, to me, it has a ring to it where it's an offensive act. You do it to reach a goal, right? You use violence for that. To me, that's not valid. It's like in my life, that's not a valid tactic to reach a goal, is to use violence. As a defense mechanism, using force to me is not just valid. It is actually, you know, the preferred method of defense. Usually, especially if the offense is physical, you're not going to use conversation first. You're not going to use diplomacy first. If somebody comes at you swinging, you just try to swing harder and better and faster. I mean, that's what you do. You neutralize it, and that is ending violence. That is not violence. You're ending the violence that is being perpetrated. But that's what the new age does. That's what the sort of the law of attraction and this whole movement does, is it wants to make you feel guilty about even considering defending yourself.
Right.
And that you, just by being in that very position, have done something wrong, and that it's your fault, and you've attracted this. And, you know, it's all kinds of convoluted bullshit where a fundamental truth is taken and it's being twisted through the ringer so often that you know, you don't even recognize it. There is a truth, a little piece of truth in there, but, you know, skewed in lies. And this is the piece where I think we've gone to, you know, why we went through 2020 and onward, because you had even if people don't subscribe to the new age, they were indoctrinated with that. You didn't have that as much, let's just say, I think in the Christian traditions, there was less acceptance for that. You know, there was sort of a red line that was met and then you fought back, and that's not there anymore. I think it's important. I think it's important that we find that again. How do we find that again? How do we find that this is my line in the sand. If you cross this, you're in trouble.
Right. Well, there's there's a trend out there right now, like along those lines that you were describing, which I'm seeing that people are, they're no longer able to deal with any kind of conflict at all, right? So they're just automatically like traumatized. All these like people are, oh, the trauma, right? Oh, the gaslighting, right? That word gaslighting, okay? Well, I mean, that word has become, like a mainstream. It's been mainstreamed because gaslighting, that word gaslighting 10 years ago, nobody heard that word. You would, only people that were therapists, that might be treating people would tell people about the word gaslighting. Now everyone's going gaslighting. This is how, your ability, your defensive mechanism, the natural mechanism that sets the alarms going off in your head is disabled, right? So, and it goes back again to this new age movement, and like, you mentioned Course in Miracles, like Byron Katie, right? It's all about, you can have a miracle every day in your life, every day, so long as you unconditionally forgive thine enemies. That's what it says. This is programming people to not fight back against those who oppress them, right? And so it was a perfect setup. So when COVID came along, I mean, people just rolled over. It was shocking, I mean, and I know we've talked about this before.
Fauci's announcing the next one right as we speak.
Right, exactly. And it's like, and the law of attraction thing. Okay, now that one too, like when you mentioned that, I'm like, that's a big one, right? Because, look, the people that are explaining the law of attraction and how it works, like you said, they're right about some things. Like, for example, something they call counterintention, right? If you don't have enough money, if you don't have a good relationship, if you're lacking, fill in the blank, it's because you have in your DNA programmed in something called counterintention, right? So it's actually blocking you. There's this unconscious block that's preventing you from getting what you deserve as God. But it's like, and it can really do a number on your brain, because you can start to think, like, maybe I am really defective. Like, where am I defective, and do I need therapy? And well, guess what? There actually are people who will help you to remove the counterintention. But of course, it costs $5,000. But they will remove the counterintention block.
Okay, but there's a truth to this, Frank.
Yes, there is absolutely a truth to it. So where do you draw the line between recognizing that you've actually been programmed for lack? Because yes, I mean, absolutely. Look at our society, this chaotic society, this schizophrenic society around us. We've basically programmed ourselves to, and this has been part of the globalist agenda. This is absolutely true. However, how far does it really go? Is it another one of these cases where people are traumatized and gaslit by the smallest little thing? Or is it normal as part of your life to have these blockages because you need to work something out in yourself, something in the darkness of your soul needs to be worked out? And we had this talk on Quartet about telepathy. And I was saying, like, I don't think telepathy is going to be a natural thing, because humans are always going to need a form of anonymity to be able to work out the dark stuff. Imagine if you're standing on the street naked and everyone sees you. Like, you don't have a chance to work on something if everyone can see it transparently, and if you don't have a chance to kind of go into your closet or your cave and like mull it over and work it out. Because when you emerge and you really do beat that blockage, not because you paid someone $5,000 and they've now beat it, but you understand why you had that block, and suddenly you actually remove the block, and guess what? You actually draw into your life what you were blocking before. This is the fine line here that we're talking about, wouldn't you say?
I agree. I also think that there are people that are close to me whose mind I can read to a certain degree. You know what I mean? I know them so well, and we're so connected, and we're similar frequencies. So I can very much sense their thought processes. Maybe not down to the word, but like the gist of it. But but it is a form of respect not to intrude when not invited.
Right,
You know
and
what
you're
I
also
mean?
in the same resonance field with this person over long periods of time, so you are resonating on certain frequencies to get certain thoughts, right?
It's true, but what I mean in general, I think that the telepathy discussion can be sort of reframed a little bit, where if we return to this level where we once were, where this was normal, there's also this level of respect. Just because
Right.
someone leaves their door
I see where
unlocked,
you're going. I see where you're going with it.
you know,
And you're talking about here about something that has to do with realms of, I call them realms of consciousness. You were describing them in terms of other senses, that we have, that we're not just that, but we do have other senses, just that we aren't using them because we're not trained to explore those other realms of the earthly existence. These are things that are connected to the earth. And we talk about Mother Earth all the time, but we don't really accept and understand that the earth really is a living being, that we can actually step into contact with that being, and that what's going on in the world right now is actually not just a series of coincidences that, like, oh, we're having more earthquakes all of a sudden, or volcanoes. No, because really the ancient people, they looked at it more animistically. They looked at the earth as this connection to them. And when there were more earthquakes, it's because Mother Earth is shaking, man. She is shaking right now. There's earthquakes all happening all over the place right now. There's a reason for that. And it has to do with the fact that, the planetary animal mother's pissed off too at the chaos that's going around. And there's going to be a kind of reset that's going to happen on a natural level. But these are things that are tied into these other realms of perception. And we've lost touch with those. And we're reducing them to what the material world will want us to see only with the senses that we have in the material level.
We kind of always arrive at this point in a discussion where we go, okay, so we laid out some of the fundamental challenges that we face. Seeing them helps because we can identify when when we're being approached with bullshit. When your bullshit meter goes up, you go, okay, I don't need to engage here. We've identified the urgency over and over again. There is an urgency. What are some of the walkable solutions at this time? Because we are, I don't know if you follow people like Sabrina Wallace, for example, and she's really deep into the how much we've been already invaded and people are so unaware. So what I know, I can't say, Frank, hey, give me the solutions here, but what are some of the walkable paths that you see work better than others?
Well, I think one of the first things people can do to help themselves is to first of all disconnect from a lot of the hustle bustle activity out there, to feel the need to follow the storyline. There's this narrative that's being driven out there, and if you're fooled by it, you'll have this idea that you constantly got to keep up. I know people are like, even spiritual people, like the news is running constantly. They want to follow this story. They want to know what's going on with Musk and Doge or Trump and the EU and the stock market crashing. And when you get caught up in that, you're completely being pulled out of your center, your calmness, right? Because when you're not in your center and you're not calm, when you're worried, there's a looming World War III out there, et cetera, et cetera. Let me ask you this. Do you really think that if there's a World War III that happens, that you'll be able to change anything about whether it happens, you in your own individual place? Or is it actually, you're actually contributing through fear of a World War III by putting that resonance out there, and instead, right? So what can you actually change in your own personal life? You will not be able to change. I put money on it that there's going to be a World War III if that's what is wanting to be happening, and if that's what actually manifests. You won't be able to change it. But what you can change is you can change your own state of consciousness. And that means disconnecting, not following the narrative. If it happens, it happens. But if you go into nature and you connect, with with this organic, natural form of life. I mean, there's a big difference between electric light, wouldn't you say, and going out into the full moon and having organic light hit you. I mean, that's the difference between reality, nature, and artificiality.
Damn you, Frank, open up the moon can of worms here. The moon as an artifact in the sky that, there's let's stick with the sun. just for a moment. I'm having some troubles with the moon being so natural, natural. But hey, I hear what you're saying, and it's also, um, if even within the framework of there's an electromagnetic grid, there's great manipulation, we still have the ability to connect with the real thing. Like we have it, it's still here, but we need to do it. And when we do it, we realize we are at that fundamental level. We are made of the same stuff. We're individual expressions of it. But people, to me, this idea that you believe in a creator, in God who created the earth, but you don't see earth as a living being, although it provides everything that gives you life. I don't see how that connects in your brain. How can you eat the plants and eat the animals and drink the water, everything that earth provides, but not acknowledge it as a living being? That to me doesn't. But if you do, you can recharge, you can do all kinds of beautiful things like you say. And I think the answer is always so simple. Sort of people can go, that can't be that simple, but truly it is that. If we reconnect, a lot of the other problems start falling away. We just have to do it, right?
Well, yeah, and I think the big thing is really the world of IT, and we're so addicted to this information technology and the information flow that accompanies that, and sitting within the resonant field of electrical cables and wires, and like Sabrina Wallace, I mean, she's about the epitome of, in terms of how far you can go down the rabbit hole with respect to us connected to, they try to connect and dock into our biological systems. I mean, this is all stuff that they're working on because they're trying to crack the amazing human machine, that was designed and built, that has all these amazing functions, and we have yet to find and explore most of those functions because we're really caught up in the immediate senses around us. And you can really develop these these levels of intuition and empathy and feeling if you really spend as much time as you can getting into nature. I mean, I know it's hard for people that are in the city, and I've lived in the cities too, and I know what that's like. You're just in this buzz of concrete and steel. But if there's no denying that whenever you do go into nature and you can get away and sit in an isolated place in quietude, listen to animals or the wildlife, and just kind of smell the air and feel the sun, and just have this connection, that you're getting back in touch with probably the most important aspect of what our ancient forefathers were connected to. They used to gather in places and do ceremony and connect with these other realms of human dimension, and they would do that in these sacred places that we now identify as Stonehenge and other such places around the planet. We don't really even understand them anymore. They're these ancient relics, and we think, wow, isn't it amazing that they're actually set up on this weird ley line? How did they know back then that this energy spot here was like the way it was? I mean, if they didn't have instruments, etc. This shows us that we once had those senses, we once had those abilities, and we once had the culture which would actually value this form of interaction with reality. And so I think that's part of distinguishing what is reality and what is simulation. And so I think that's kind of the thing that people should spend a lot of time deliberating and looking at this whole new age scene as a sellout in a way, because they did sell us out. They didn't give us the signs of warning when the danger was approaching. They all backed off, they all copped out, and to this day, none of them have come forward and said, you know what, actually, I was totally wrong on this one. No, they're continuing along, doing the grift, as they say, and it continues. And so that, I think, helped us to identify who were the grifters and what is really important in your life to you as a biological being, as a being that's connected to the earth, that lives within a biosphere in this amazing location. Look at the size of the galaxy and where we are. I mean, what a miracle it is that we're even here.
Amen. I think we've sort of, as the human family, gone from one box to another. We try to make the boxes bigger and more expansive, but in recent years, it's become so obvious that the only thing that matters is the truth. And I don't claim to have the whole truth. But what I do claim is that I constantly calibrate myself to it so I can see more of it and understand more of it and comprehend more of it and live more of it. That's the intention. It's only truth at this point. I don't care if it fits a narrative. I don't care if it upsets people. I don't care if it challenges their belief system. I couldn't care less. That's their problem to work out. We're going to follow the truth, and I think it's the only way out. You know, it's the only way out of this sort of bullshit situation that we're in. And so we don't need a new age that is defined by others and that has all these parameters and requirements to fulfill. You know, I just think truth is it. And that's why we called this show The Naked Truth. Remember, that's what we show up for. And oh, I can already tell you what some of the things we said today is going to upset all kinds of people. But I've never been able to grow without being challenged. Let me put it this way.
It's time to pull the stops out, man. It's like, you know, we have to talk about this stuff.
I agree.
You know, like you got to leave room in your argument to be shot down, and I'm sure we left plenty. And so, you know, the thing is, you want to stimulate this discussion. You want to get people talking about these things to pull them away from the narrative that's running out there, that's driving us into this transhumanist global conflict, you know, all this stuff that's going on. It's so like paranoid inducing, right? I mean, just the way, and then, you know, if you don't, I've noticed this, you know, when I'm in the middle of a deep dive, if some story breaks and I like, oh, I want to watch that. And they're like, no, you know what? I don't have time right now. So I leave it and I come back a week later to try and pick up the pieces. And guess what? The story's completely changed already. It doesn't even make any more sense. Like what I would have tuned into a week ago would have been an absolute waste of time because things have developed totally in another direction. In fact, you know, so you just realize it's infotainment, man. That's all it is. It's infotainment, and it has no meaning whatsoever in your world.
That's exactly what it is. You know, you kind of turned the page one more time. I thought we're at the end here, but you're so right, because that's something that I noticed is we've had some amazing stories out there in the last year. You know, talk about the Jersey drones for a month, 6 weeks.
Oh yeah,
drones every night, weird stuff. Well, there were 2 statements by 2 different presidents, none of which made any sense, and that was it. You know, it's like we used to have a story that was unfolding, and then at least there was interest and research, and we were going to go after that, and we're going to get to the bottom of it and kind of resolve it. No, stories are just there to fill the space. No beginning, no end, no sense, no meaning. It's just filling up the space. That's all that it is. And it just goes away. Like, you have major conflict happening on a world stage on Tuesday. On Thursday, that's forgotten because Doge has just discovered that condoms were delivered to monkeys in Cambodia. And the major conflict is gone because condoms, you know. So you're right. It's insanity. And we have to find a way to be sane. And to me, the only way to do that is to stick with the truth, the real truth, you know, as best as we can. My brother, where can people keep up with you when you're not on A Naked Truth, when you're not at the Quartet? Where are you on the socials, and where can they find or pre-sign up for the new webinar?
Well, obviously, the easiest to remember is my name, frankjacob.com. Then you could find links to everything. You know, the webinar masterclass stuff is always on cyberhive.tv, and you know, I'm on Facebook. I don't do a lot, you know. I post info about what I'm up to, or if we do a show, or I'm not one of these people that I'm having a cup of coffee right now and I'm looking outside and the sun is shining kind of Facebookers. But I use a little bit of Twitter, or X or whatever it's called now, and probably be called Z in the next 6 months later or something. Who knows, right? But I don't, you know, I do that. I'm out there, but people can reach me, and if they want to reach out to me, they can go to my website. There's a contact form there. They can write me stuff. I get all my mail. I do read them all. I don't always have the time to answer them all, but I do, hopefully, and I always try to get back to everybody that sends me something which is really important, or a tip or something like that. But yeah, man, stay sane and stay in the truth, brother. It's always a really great interaction with you, and I'm, you know, it's one of those things that I think pushes a lot of you know, the ideas that are in my mind, you know, it's great to bounce them off of you, because it really, you know, I never know what's going to come back, and I really enjoy it every time.
And vice versa, because we don't map these conversations out. We have a general sense of what might be in the field and important, and then it's about, you know, you have a different way of looking at these or approaching them, but ultimately we sort of find, because we're committed to the truth, we sort of tend to find very similar perspectives, which I think, you know, it's beautiful. And it's like, I have the same experience. It's refreshing, you know, to put new ways of looking at something in my mind. So thank you for that, Frank. And always a pleasure. I think this was edition 12, right? Is that true? Edition 12?
I believe so. I believe it was 12.
Episode 12 of The Naked Truth. Frank Jacob, my wonderful co-host here. Thank you, Frank. And Inspire Tribe, thank you so much for tuning in. You know we love you. We appreciate you. And we'll be back with you again very, very soon.